and welcome back to another episode of When Life Feels Messy. This is Erin Raspberry, one of your wonderful hosts, and today it's just me. Our lovely Ashley is still on maternity leave, and also, just to give a disclaimer, we did have Cyndi Grady join us and record this whole episode with us, and then afterwards, some reason, tech issues, none of the audio is saved. So this is a part 2 retry of this podcast episode, and hopefully everything works okay for us, but it's just going to be me today, and thankfully Cyndi has allowed me to kind of share just some of the things that she was going to talk about and just her knowledge base and advice around the topic, which let me get into that. Today's topic is going to be on when faith hurts. And so this is about navigating religious and spiritual trauma. And this is episode 26. So we will kind of get into it. So I wanted to give Cyndi a shout out just because a lot of what I'm going to be sharing in this episode comes from her. And so give credit where credit is due. But you might recognize Cyndi. She's been on a couple episodes of our podcast before. It's always such a joy to be able to get her to join us, and she is one of the counselors on the Denton CAPS campus. And so shout out Cyndi, thank you so much for all of this. Hopefully I do you justice here in this episode, but let's kind of get started. So we are gonna really just start off with getting a baseline idea of what religious and spiritual trauma actually is. So religious trauma is really focused on psychological and emotional damage that's caused by experiences that we might have with a specific religious context, right? So this can include, like, if we have, like, harmful teachings, abusive religious practices, or experience any type of coercion, control, or manipulation by religious leaders or even religious institutions. And it's often associated with a person's relationship to a particular religion or a religious community. Now, spiritual trauma is a little bit broader of an umbrella here, and this refers to trauma that's related to a person's sense of spirituality or connection in general to something that's greater than themselves. And this may or may not have anything to do with organized religion in any capacity. And it encompasses both experiences that are within religious context and more personal, existential type crisis related to spirituality. One of the first questions that I asked Cyndi on our podcast episode was what her experience was working with this topic, because when we were looking at having Cyndi join us, I wanted to make sure it was something that, of course she wanted to talk about. And one of the things that we came up with is religious and spiritual trauma because of her experience working with it. So what she kind of shared was her experience with this is having a wide range of working with individuals who have experienced both spiritual and religious abuse and trauma in her previous work where she was at a domestic violence nonprofit. And you might remember this from, I think it was episode 4 when she joined us to talk about intimate partner violence. She shared a lot more about her time working there and a lot of things that she saw. And so obviously this was something that came up too. And she said that many of the clients that she worked with and were abused by intimate partners or spouses, a part of the abuse a lot of time was often incorporating religious beliefs and teachings as a part of that, almost like a power abuse and control tactics that were used. So this was something that came up kind of hand in hand with her experience. And then there was also experiences that she had where clients and individuals that she worked with actually had religious leaders that caused their own sense of harm by encouraging to stay in abusive relationships and even blaming them for the abuse that they experienced. And also in her work at TWU, she sees religious and spiritual trauma and abuse come up in a lot of clients, especially we are on a college campus where we are getting to meet students who are approaching independence for the first time, and it's really new. And so a lot of times we see this kind of come up of this is their first time being away from that environment, and they might have experienced, harm religiously, either from like family or even just being able to start questioning and processing what their beliefs are, because now they're being exposed to different alternatives. So very much so, Cyndi is experienced and skilled in working with this population, an area, which is why we're so excited to have her join us. So yeah, we want to also kind of think about, as we're kind of going through this, I always like to put a disclaimer, especially because religious and spiritual trauma and abuse can sometimes be a very just kind of triggering or hard topic, especially given, wherever you're at in your own journey with it. And so just kind of take this moment, kind of check in with yourself if it feels like something that maybe we don't have the capacity to listen to right now. Let's, kind of listen to that and do what we need to do. Also, if at any point in this you need to take breaks, please do so. We don't want this episode to be super triggering or cause any harm, rather than just wanting it to be informative. And if it feels like it resonates, then hopefully this validates your own experiences to some degree. But some common signs and symptoms to look out for is really when we start to notice a sense of guilt and shame, maybe lower self-esteem and self-worth, also confusion and fear. And so this comes up a lot of time when we see the religious spiritual trauma and abuse kind of taking place. And so I want to kind of pivot a little bit to some key elements of religious trauma that we kind of see coming up. And those are doctrinal harm, abuse and control, excommunication or ostracism, or confusion and loss of identity. So doctrinal harm is when we are exposed to harmful or really extreme religious teachings. And these are very much fear-based doctrines, right? So examples would be fear of damnation or going to hell, guilt and shame coming up, or even dogmatic type beliefs that really stifle personal growth and critical thinking, right? Those would be the kind of things where maybe even like questioning or being able to like think about things in a more critical, complex way are viewed as bad. And not something that you're allowed to do. Abuse and control. I think when we have religious abuse come up, one of the biggest things is we see the manipulation, we see the control tactics, the gaslighting, and even sometimes being exploited by religious leaders or institutions. Excommunication or ostracism. This is when individuals get shunned, right, or ejected by their religious community due to asking questions, specifically about beliefs and practices, or even if they leave the faith, which can lead to a whole sense of isolation, guilt, and a loss of identity in general. And then confusion or loss of identity. So when someone starts to question just even, what they've been taught, or even just like what it is that I believe, or they're rejected by their religious community due to that, this kind of brings up a struggle sometimes with sense of self, and we might experience shame or feel as though we've lost our purpose or moral compass kind of altogether, which just creates a lot of just unhappiness and discontent and a lot of fear and anxiety and guilt, like we talked about. It's just kind of a breeding ground for things to not feel the greatest. And then key elements of spiritual trauma. So this might be when we're having like a crisis of faith or existential doubt. So if we're having like a deep personal conflict, or even feeling like we're suffering related to questions of like meaning of life or purpose or the nature of existence as a whole. And this can occur in religious or spiritual contexts. This is not just one. This can be very universal, and it may really arise from a profound sense of disillusionment with your spiritual beliefs. There's also loss of connection. So when we feel spiritually disconnected, and this can be due to losing faith, feeling abandoned by a higher power, or struggling with spiritual disorientation, it's going to make us feel like there's a huge disconnect, right, of either something that used to be there and was really strong or really present, and now trying to figure out like, what do I do with this space now where it feels like I don't really know how to fill it or what goes there. We also have negative spiritual experiences. So especially when spiritual abuse happens, like thinking of like if I'm being manipulated or traumatized by those that are claiming any type of spiritual authority, or even trauma resulting from like spiritual practices or rituals that were harmful or coercive or unwelcoming, then I'm going to almost have like a really tainted negative view of those experiences, right? Especially if they're harmful. And that in itself causes some trauma. And then religious trauma syndrome. So this is sometimes used to describe the cumulative effects of both religious and spiritual trauma. So this can include feelings of being alienated, having anxiety and depression symptoms, and a big struggle with reconciling your spirituality after experiencing a harm. So some of the questions that I asked Cyndi to kind of explain for you, our listeners, were really centered around just like how we see this kind of playing out, what is kind of helpful advice for you as our listeners and for our students here at TWU around this. Specifically, if you're listening to this and things are resonating or light bulbs are going off for you. So we wanted to kind of have a well-rounded idea of what this looks like, next steps, and what you can do. So starting off, I asked her with if she could kind of explain the difference between spiritual struggles or doubts and an actual spiritual trauma. And so she shared that it's really common and honestly even healthy for people to question their own beliefs and to struggle in their faith. And this can really lead to a person either becoming stronger in their faith or maybe realizing that their faith doesn't fit with them, in which case, they may wish to explore their faiths or traditions altogether. And so that's kind of like a normal part of, spiritual struggle. I kind of think of it like the exploration, questioning piece of it. But spiritual trauma is resulting from harm that's caused by others, such as family, faith leaders, people in your religious or spiritual institutions that use faith teachings or practices to exert, gain, or maintain power and control over you. And so you could probably see, even as, describing the two, that there seems to be a big difference, right? One is that you are kind of in control of being able to have this exploration into question. And the other side of it, where the trauma, the abuse comes into play, is when someone else has that power and control and is using it against you. I also asked her, how does someone realize that they are experiencing religious trauma, especially if it's someone who was raised in a religious environment where this trauma, this abuse might feel quote unquote normal, or it's been ingrained from you from, such a young age, especially if you grew up in a religion. And Cyndi kind of shared that a person really might begin to have doubts or feel like something isn't right on their own, right? They may feel wrong about having these doubts, especially if the doubts are in opposition to the predominant beliefs and messages that they're getting from important people in their life. And they might also begin to realize that they're experiencing religious trauma if they hear about it from a friend, a therapist. Maybe they listen to a podcast like this episode, or maybe they read a book where they start to notice like, okay, someone is describing either what I'm experiencing as something that's not okay, or they're talking about their quote-unquote normal experience, and it's very different from mine. And this can be really common coming up for new college students, right? Because it seems that when we move to campus or we, decide to go into higher education and get some independence to some degree, it's giving us a space for what we were experiencing and the opportunity to see what others' different experiences are. And this can also make us feel very confused. It can make us feel disconnected between what we've been taught and what we feel. And we also may feel afraid to voice those questions or concerns. And so really starting to notice, if you are someone that's starting to kind of question or have doubts, or people have called out or said things that makes you kind of do a double take and think about it, this might be something to reflect on and see if this is accurate or coming up for you. I also wanted to hear from her of what kind of mental health struggles that we really see people kind of facing when they have religious trauma. And I think the big ones that we kind of talked about is definitely the anxiety, right? Especially when you have very fear-based teachings and doctrines and just like religious beliefs that can sometimes instill a lot of anxiety and fear. You see that ramp up, especially when we start doubting or we, remove ourselves from it, or we're even just starting to question things. A lot of times that can kind of ramp up those feelings of fear or anxiety around saying anything. But we also see a lot of depressive symptoms come up, especially if, we're feeling that isolation, we're feeling that abandonment or rejection from whether it's, religious, spiritual individuals in our life, or just feeling like a disconnect from the religion we were raised in and have been part of for, X amount of time. We might have some PTSD symptoms come up, especially if we went through a lot of religious, spiritual trauma and abuse. And then, of course, identity issues, right? If this was something that was a integral part of my identity for, X amount of time, then that's going to have us feel like, okay, who am I right now, right? Like, what is my identity? And also probably feeling a little in a limbo period in the very beginning of that. We also wanted to look at, like, how does trauma affect an individual's sense of self and their relationship with other people? And so Cyndi had some really great just like notes for this. And started off with, people might start to view themselves as flawed, as sinful, or damaged, right? So almost like a negative taint on my self-view, like something's wrong with me. We might also start to feel like we're unlovable, unforgivable, or even like a failure. We might start to feel abandoned or betrayed by quote unquote God or whatever, higher being or thing that we believe in. We might also feel like we can't trust them. And then if that's the case, then we have the question, who can we trust? And sometimes that in itself can be a hard question to sit with if it feels like there is no one or no thing or no entity that we can trust. We might also start to doubt that others can love us and may believe that we are deserving of the abuse or harm that's being inflicted upon us, kind of like I'm not worthy of love and kindness and care from other people, and I deserve whatever negative ill treatment that they bestow upon me, basically. We might doubt ourselves as parents, like, am I capable of raising a child in a positive and healthy way, especially if I feel like I'm not a quote unquote good person. We might have strained or estranged relationships with family or friends. We might feel lost without something to hold on to, especially like if we have to give up our faith. We might be afraid of what the outside world holds for fear of being led astray, right? Or even just having, new behaviors, new thoughts, ideologies that feel like too far outside of what's expected or okay in your specific belief system. And women may also feel responsible for men's reactions to their bodies and guilty for quote unquote tempting a man, especially with just the stereotype that the way women dress or what they say or do is really indicating on whether they deserve potential just advances, harm, or not. And that can be really ramped up, especially depending upon just certain standards, belief systems that are held. And then we might constantly focus on pleasing others, right? This almost like people pleaser mode goes full drive of, I'm feeling just like such a loss of sense of self and confidence that I then focus so much on trying to be and perform for other people. Nextly, I kind of wanted to look at if individuals are experiencing religious trauma or spiritual trauma, what kind of unique challenges in even seeking support, whether it be through therapy, whether it be, support groups or, whatever it might be, like what might those challenges look like? And Cyndi shared that it might often have been taught that mental health concerns are a result of not being strong enough in the faith. Like not believing, not participating in faith practices properly is the reason why you're having mental health problems, and therefore it is not something that's encouraged or even emphasized as an option, right? Instead, it's kind of looked at as you're not doing enough or you're doing something wrong. They may often receive messages that if they only strengthen their faith, right, or pray it away, that they'll be fine, right? That, if you pray so many times in a day, it'll go away. But the problem with that is what happens if you do pray every day, like you're told, and then your mental health concerns don't go away, right? Then you're going to further feel like you're not enough, that something's wrong with you, and it's going to take even further of a hit to your sense of self. You may also have received messages that only counseling that you could receive should come from religious leaders, if you're allowed to receive counseling at all, kind of thing. Certain places have, what they consider like in-house counselors and things that you go to, but that's kind of the standard, and it's not okay to get anyone in the community that's a mental health professional. And honestly, sometimes we see too is that the people that are considered counselors in certain religious spiritual institutions are not professionals. They're not people who have gone through education means to earn degrees and certifications. They're just kind of labeled as counselors, and so it might not be very helpful to you, or even incorporating just even like educated and statistically helpful strategies or theories and modalities to actually help you work through your mental health concerns. And then you may also receive messages from faith-based counselors that minimize or deny your experiences and concerns, right? You might be told that because you have certain characteristics or membership in a community, it's against teachings and it's unacceptable. So again, I think that kind of goes along with kind of the gaslighting, the control that comes in to keep you right in this bubble, in this circle, and kind of keep some control there. I also wanted to see if there were particular challenges that Cyndi thought that maybe students that identify as religious face when they leave home, maybe for the first time, to come to college, especially if they've experienced religious trauma or abuse in the past, even if they're not aware, right, that they experienced that. And she shared that, we might feel a loss, especially when we're separated from the church. Like if it was a major part of our life, in our, weekly or even daily routine, it's probably going to feel like a huge loss to us. Like something that, used to be there, used to be ingrained so much in the routine, and now it's not there. It's probably going to throw us for a loop a little bit. But we might also feel guilty, right? That we're, potentially defying parents' wishes by seeking help, or sometimes even by going out of the community, right? Like your hometown, or even moving away, or going to college sometimes is something that's frowned upon. And so kind of feeling like if I'm defying my parents' wishes by seeking help or, doing things that I want to do or achieving my goals, that can be really hard and weigh on us, especially if it's something that we're afraid that somehow parents might find out that we're doing. And something that I hear a lot of time, right, is this idea of, well, my parents don't know that I don't go to church now, right? Like I just tell them that I go up here because maybe their parents live, hours away and they wouldn't know or be able to check that. But there's kind of this fear of like, I don't want them to know that I'm not going kind of thing, but also I don't want to go. So sometimes there can be just a lot of just fear, anxiety, and discontent around that. And you might also wonder if you're defying God or a higher entity or, belief system if we're seeking out help. And we might also feel betrayed by the faith as they really come to understand how we have been harmed by its teachings or by those that are in power in the faith or, religious spiritual institution. I also, wanted to think about even generationally trauma-wise. Like, is there anything that, thinking in that lens that kind of comes up and can be passed down through families in that aspect of generational trauma? And I think the consensus is that there can sometimes be a normalization of abuse and trauma within a family, right? Especially if it's generationally, to where you might even be so many generations in that you can't even see like where it started, right? It just feels like the norm that's kind of happened, or is, how our family does it kind of thing. So it might not be recognized as this. It might not be recognized as harm and trauma. But unresolved trauma in our parents or in a parent might be transmitted through the beliefs, their behaviors, their attitudes that really kind of shape the world view and the lens that they're creating for their child and the next generation, and especially for what seems quote unquote right or wrong. And so that can kind of be skewed and taint the next generation's view on that. But now that's kind of a lot of seeming more just negative and kind of like, wow, that's a lot of things to think about. But we also wanted to, of course, talk about on the brighter positive side of how to cope and heal from religious and spiritual trauma, because there is definitely ways to do this, and we see that, and there's so many books and readings and podcasts and just resources coming out for people to be able to navigate that and feel like you have a sense of support in doing that. So the first question I had for Cyndi is what healing processes or coping strategies that she has found to be effective for people that are dealing with religious trauma. And so she shared a couple of things, such as journaling or having other creative outlets, sharing experiences with supportive others, whether that's, you have friends that just get it, or maybe they've gone through the same thing, or you join a support group, or you go to therapy, or you just tell your friends hey, this is what I'm really struggling with, and I just kind of need a soundboard right now. Learning to listen to podcasts, read books, look for resources and things that kind of validate your experience and to help you see that there are so many other people that have also experienced this and have gone through it, and to be able to say feeling more self-assured in doing what you need to do. And then also I think if we're going to seek the mental health route of it, which I will always encourage, it's going to be nice to kind of have someone that just gives some unconditional acceptance of you, right? Validates your experience and the impact of this, and also providing a safe space to just unpack and process all the concerns, all the exploration of new ideas without fear or worry, right? That someone's going to judge you, or you're going to get in trouble, or people will find out, kind of thing. I also wanted to see, how do we rebuild and redefine our spiritual beliefs after experiencing a trauma without having that feeling of I lost myself or I'm rejecting my past. And so Cyndi shared that sometimes people think it's all or nothing, and that, they might feel that they have to lose or leave everyone and everything in their faith. So, however, as people process and explore their experiences and concerns, they might start to recognize some aspects of their faith that they experience that they wish to kind of keep. I then wanted to ask Cyndi, how do we start with the rebuilding and redefining process of even determining what my spiritual beliefs are? And especially when we're experiencing a trauma, we want to make sure that we're not tapping into or getting into that place where I lose myself or I feel like I'm rejecting my past. And so Cyndi shared that, sometimes people think that it's really all or nothing, right? That they feel they have to lose or leave everyone and everything from their faith. But the reality is that a lot of times as people process and explore their experiences and their concerns, they may recognize that some aspects of their faith and their experiences with that, or maybe even certain people that they want to keep, right? On the other hand, though, that they might find themselves beginning to really gravitate towards new beliefs and new communities that are more affirming, right? And then it kind of helps us feel like instead of running, rejecting something, we're moving toward and embracing something new, right? So kind of keeping it in that more positive, neutral aspect of, I'm not just taking away and losing something. I'm building and I'm growing towards something that feels more authentic and right for me. And we also wanted to talk about, ways to reconnect to your spirituality in a healthy way if you choose to, especially after experiencing any type of religious and spiritual trauma or abuse. And Cyndi shared that for college students specifically, how we can balance the need for mental health support while navigating religious or spiritual concerns that they might be carrying is important for us to kind of think about. Thinking about, we'd want to ask and look at how to embrace the idea that mental health and religious and spiritual concerns are not mutually exclusive, right? These types of concerns are totally normal to have and work on in therapy, and really recommending that you connect with someone, whether it's on our CAPS team for individual counseling, whether it's an outside therapist or support group. We want to make sure that this is a place where we are not feeling any way, shape, or form judged. We feel supported, we feel safe, especially as we process through the struggles that we might be experiencing, as well as listening to podcasts, reading books, really looking into what are the resources out there for me to be able to take in and learn for that validate my concerns with what I'm going through. So we really appreciated Cyndi coming on and sharing such helpful information, and hopefully this was something that even just got the ball rolling for you if you needed it to, of just having questions and resonating and thinking about, if any of this fits for me, what does that might mean and what might be next steps. Cyndi also was so nice to share some resources for you. Specifically under the podcast, she shared an episode called Did the Church Groom Me for Abuse? And it's on the channel Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. She shared that it was an episode that came out on April 1st, 2024. So definitely give it a listen. She also shared the podcast channel, which is called I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist, which I have personally listened to, and I have found it really helpful and informative. So definitely give those a listen and check those out. She also shared a couple books called When Religion Hurts by Dr. Laura Anderson and Traumatized by Religious Abuse, Courage, Hope, and Freedom for Survivors by Connie Baker. So with that, we also asked Cyndi for a quote to kind of end this episode. And she gave us a really great one, which ties into one of the book recommendations that she gave. And the quote she chose was by Dr. Laura Anderson, and it says, "You are allowed to outgrow beliefs that no longer serve you." So with that, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of When Life Feels Messy. We appreciate you bearing with us as it's just me on this episode. And stay tuned for next month, where we will have our very own Ashley Barrera rejoining us for future episodes. We hope that you will stay tuned and join us again, and we will see you next time. Bye!